And hey everyone! And you'll notice that I'm not fettling around pressing buttons this week on my Pico producer, mainly because the buttons aren't flying off and a big mess happening. But yeah, thank you for coming along to this week's IoT Live. As always, we've got the fantastic Cliff Aegis just here in the country for now, but not for long. And this week we're looking at the NVidia home lab that our friend Paul DeCarlo here has set up. So that's why we've got Paul DeCarlo along. So before we go much further, Paul, do you want to just introduce yourself and say sort of who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I am a principal cloud advocate at Microsoft, also lead our IoT advocacy team. And as you'll hear on our presentation today, I also sort of moonlight as a professor at the University of Houston, which, as you'll learn, was a big reason as to why we came up with the thing that we're going to talk about today and how we were able to use it across really a wide variety of different audiences. After kind of proving it out for a necessity. So I don't want to ruin too much right before getting started.
I like it.
Say too much. Yeah.
Yeah, we just finished the show there. We're done. That's the information part.
Yeah, that's it. Surprise.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, Paul, you've run a series of classes online, which is kind of where this is coming from, and I've joined one of those, and I had my own issues, which meant that I'm going to be able to sort of relive some of this coming Thursday, as it happens, where we'll be watching Cliff get guided through some of what I did, but slightly different to what I did as well, I think. But I mean, this what you created here, Paul, to allow people to dial in to your fleet of Jetson Nanos really solves a problem that is relatively new, essentially, but isn't when you think about it. I mean, obviously, the pandemic has forced people to have to do this sort of thing. We can't meet in person. We can't go to a location where you take all of your Jetson Nanos and set them all up on hotel Wi-Fi and fail. But so you've got a nice location. Go on.
I was going to say, we hope it sets up on the hotel Wi-Fi.
Well, yeah, because you'll be replicating that bad part of the situation there, because you'll be in Seattle.
Wait, are we getting ahead of ourselves here? So we're already talking about that, right? I just want to make sure we're level set here with the audience. So,
oh yeah.
What we're talking about today is we're kind of going back in time from a series of workshops that I guess Pete you'd alluded to, and like, how did we even run these workshops? Workshops which used NVIDIA embedded hardware. And then the fun part about it all is on Thursday, because Cliff didn't get to join us for those fun workshops, we're going to continue sort of deep diving with this particular device as we explore its capabilities from his hotel room that he will be in. You'll be in Seattle next week, from what I understand.
Tomorrow, go flying tomorrow.
Exciting stuff. That's exciting. So I don't know how you do this. You are the pilot, and you're traveling, and you're going to be the learner on Thursday. That is a lot to handle. But that said, so what we're going to be talking about a little bit more today is like, how did we ever even get this workshop thing off the ground? What was the reason for that? And how that, I guess, could be something if you out there wanted to build something like this. We'll learn a little bit about networking for sure, but I will apologize. This is more of like a teardown. So it's been a while since I looked at this thing since I built it. And we'll sort of go into that whole story.
I'm sharing your screen now, Paul, by the way. I'm sharing your screen now. So I know that you've got the nice page open here. So you can feel free to run through whatever it is you need to, just so you're aware, you know, just in case you start pulling up like jobs at Google or something like that.
So what we're looking at here on the screen is just some evidence that, yes, I am a professor at the University of Houston. So normally what I'll do is sort of teach this class in our winter or summer time frames, due mainly to the the amount of effort it takes to go for 16 weeks doesn't exactly play well with working full-time at Microsoft. But I've just found these to be so rewarding, teaching these kind of classes, because where these actually happen, you'll see as I'm scrolling through here, I'll sort of talk about what we do. It's taught in the Management Information Systems department, which falls under the College of Business at the University of Houston. And a lot of these students are primarily business oriented. They don't really focus 100% on, say, your rigorous computer science field and that sort of thing. And this is actually a really interesting opportunity. I mean, at first you would think, well, is that really the audience you want to talk to about tech? And I would say absolutely. There's no reason not to. I've certainly felt some headwinds in terms of opinions from people. It's like, why are you teaching cutting edge technology in a business school? Well, you'd be surprised what they turn these things into. So what you're seeing here, an example of, is one of the assignments they get there is to build a scalable website on Azure. And I sort of don't really give them any direction on how to do that. They can take it to whatever they want. And this is one of the standout ones from the class where a student was getting married, and I guess in a traditional type of wedding that they were doing, they'll have a number of additional ceremonies. So they had a wedding in Houston and one in Oklahoma City, and she built this full-on website, in a week's worth of instruction that you could register for in either way. You can see that there's maps, render on a mobile phone, it had a reservation system, and these sorts of things. That's kind of like the only thing that remains static whenever we teach this class, though. Some of the other things that we'll sort of talk about is what is cloud, that sort of thing, which in the past we've done some interesting uses of ML to see, our students properly defining what the cloud is. This is the results of that, in case you're curious. Cloud, internet, data services, access, computer. So, and that was ran over, I want to say, a couple of courses where we sort of looked at what was popular there. Now, one thing that is common, but the content usually changes, is we'll focus a day on Internet of Things. And that's what today is really going to focus on. But I just want to say that in the past, this has not always been NVIDIA embedded hardware. We've gone through like particle core, particle photon devices, the MX chip, Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, you name it. We always just pick something and sort of work with that. In the last 2 years, these NVIDIA embedded devices have been a real hit. And it's quite interesting to see what the students turn those into.
Paul?
The other things we do, yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to zoom in a little bit?
Yes. Make this a little larger for you folks out there. One of the things that we challenge the students with sort of at the end of the class is to give their own presentation, which usually is around their website, but could also be around anything that they've learned in the class. And of course, they learn a whole ton. And prior to COVID-19, we would kick off the final class at our local Houston office. And we'd also traditionally done this in the Microsoft store in the Houston Galleria. So students love this stuff. I get a lot of interesting feedback, about it being transformative in terms of, I wasn't exposed to this level of tech in certain classes, and just a lot of really high praise and good words about it. Now, what becomes interesting here, and why I'm sort of painting this picture here, is what these students often go on to do with the knowledge they learn in the class. They might not know it at the time that they take the class, but it's not uncommon that we get students who either latch on to some aspect of what they learned, whether that's, we've done emerging technology stuff in using virtual reality in the past, drones and those sorts of things. I've seen students go off and start their own companies based on ideas they got in this class, or they just go into, a traditional sort of consulting role, and they all of a sudden begin to find that this knowledge that we were teaching them is applicable to their role. In fact, probably the coolest story I could share from this was a student went off. It was from the very first class that we ever taught. A student went off to work at NASA and was like, "Hey, professor, I'd really like you to come speak at this, workshop we're doing, because I know you know a lot about Internet of Things and stuff like that. And not only did I get to tour the NASA facility, but I think it was more inspiring to see, like, wow, here's this student that you take from a traditional business class that literally took everything from the class and like turned it into a career of working with Azure services and that sort of thing for the government, I guess you would say, at the end of the day, building things that go to space. So that was
It's probably quite rewarding.
And here's the thing, Cliff. It's like, this is why I'll never stop teaching. That's but one example. They just keep coming. They just keep like it's, the more that you teach the next generation the tip of the spear, the less surprised I am that some of these folks actually do go off and do those things. And that's it's corny as it sounds. It's the thing that makes you want to get up and do this, even though traditionally this is like a time when you would take a vacation, like early January, nursing those New Year's hangovers and things like that. I'd rather teach, I tell you that honestly. So what happens, right? So of course we've got this class. It has this notoriety to it of teaching bleeding edge stuff. When we got hit with this COVID-19 pandemic across the world, the first thing that I think we all noticed was a lot of the things we took for granted or had, passion for had suddenly changed. The most obvious being just going outside in general, but, which is alleviated to some extent depending on where you live these days. But this was a bad time. This was a bad time when this class had to be taught. In fact, I would say that it was the worst time in the United States for COVID. It was like, I teach the class, I think first date was like January 6th or 10th, something like that. And that was when the peak was happening. But mind you, let me go back a little bit forward or prior to that. And it's like December 1st. And I'm thinking here, I have to teach this class virtually, like 100% virtually. That is like, that's a guarantee. I was nervous, because even when this had started in September, you have to understand, like, from my standpoint as an educator at the university, I had to watch the game of chicken get played in September, where it was like, are they going to teach in person or not? And they came up with some interesting rules. We'll just say that, it can be virtual. It can be, if someone wants to show up to your class in person, they can, but you have to wear a face shield, or some combination of the two. It's just wild, absolutely wild. And I'm thinking here, my class always has an IoT component. I'm likely going to have to make some sort of a concession this year in terms of how we teach this. And the net result of that for me would have felt like giving the students a disservice. Like, I don't know how to explain that. My fear of teaching this class this time around was, I have a pattern of which I'm used to showing up with, that I know that it works this way. And if I can see the device, I can always attach a serial cable to it. It's like having a bungee cord, right, when you're rock climbing, versus whatever this was, which is like, scale the face of the summit. No one is there to help you. And there's no cord attached to you if you're trying to do an IoT thing. So now, and I want to dig into this a little bit deeper before I jump into the specifics of this time teaching the course. You have to understand that the university, which I love dearly, is not exactly, it's not like there's a training class you go to and they say, here's how you'll teach your class. Like, alleviate all your anxiety and fears and, especially the weirdness of how we do our class. There is no way to solve this other than to look at it as an individual, as the educator yourself, which they're quite lenient with what you can do. But you have to look at yourself and say, what am I going to teach these students through the modality that I have been handed? And then adapt accordingly. So what would be the first thing you would think of is, well, I don't have a classroom I got to set up a team site randomly with a whole bunch of students. You would think this would be as easy as sending emails and saying, sign up, join my thing. I don't know about y'all. Teams is a great product, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't always work with any email. And especially when you're herding 30 students, you have to give it some special considerations. So you'll see here this screenshot. It was kind of like, by January 4th, I would like everyone to just sign in and say here, because that gives me confidence that you can access what I've set up. By the way, I set this up on a Microsoft tenant. Hope that doesn't get me in trouble, but that came with all the security permissions and rules and stuff that go with that, which was cool. It's totally cool. We can't get Zoom bombed on a Microsoft hosted Teams channel, but I just want to put out there, like, not only do I have this anxiety, like at the beginning of December, like, because the first thing I did was build this Teams channel and can students come in. And when the first student, which was on December 8th, you can see here, checked in, I was like, great.
Do you want to zoom in a bit more again, Paul?
Yeah. So the last student did not sign in. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus here, but I'll just say the timing was probably the day the class started. Probably, if not the next day.
They still had the New Year's hangover though, so you got to give them a break.
Totally. But I'm just saying, like, for my sanity as an educator, and like, we can dig into this for as long as y'all want. You have to think like what everybody had to go through in terms of an adaptation for their classes, and like, I'm not going to say like you should feel sorry for the professor. It's not that. What does kind of get me a little bit is if we are doing any disservice to students by maybe cutting corners on the content that we teach. And that was something that, I guess, for me as a, I guess wanting to hold to that standard of what this class has always been, did not want to cut any concessions. So we solved that problem. And it was actually pretty awesome because if a student, like teaching through Teams is so cool, because if a student needs help, you can absolutely dial into their computer just by saying, hey, share your screen. Like, you can see what the problem is. If they're having a problem with an Azure deployment or something, you can just do that. So that was kind of awesome. Now, going through here, we had no problem signing students up for Azure, which is one of the prerequisites. There's actually an Azure for Students offer. So if anyone out there is an educator and you wanted to use Azure services in some portion of your course, it's really easy to do that. In fact, we didn't have to pull any strings at Microsoft or anything to make that happen. We sent them their way. Nobody had a problem. Shocking, everybody got in. And we also used something called the Microsoft Learn platform. And this was kind of cool because it allowed us to gauge students were completing assignments without me having to manually check them, because Learn itself actually tells you how far along you are in certain content. So students would learn from modules based there, and me as the professor had the nice luxury of like, sign in and show me your completions. That was cool. But how did we do the Internet of Things aspect? How did we solve that? And this was a really clever thing because, again, what I would normally do in the class is haul 30 devices into a lab for a day, plug them all up somehow, somewhere, and the students would follow along with some sort of lab content, which would traditionally be something focused on, introduction to object detection algorithms, that sort of thing. Point yellow object detector at your favorite music video, that sort of thing. Well, this time around, it's kind of tough because, I can't bring the devices into the class. And this idea entered my head. I don't know. It was probably, again, the Teams channel already existed. I was at this point cutting the content out and thinking, if we can make those devices remotely accessible through the internet, then students could learn on them, just like if they were in front of them. But we wanted to go a step ahead because, remember, these are business students. while we could totally traumatize them from ever wanting to use a computer again by giving them like a shell access, and welcome to the terminal, we wanted to give them something that would feel self-service and natural, because that way they could learn in a comfortable pace. Because they're learning in a comfortable way, that would leave them hopefully inspired to want to continue on. So what you'll see here, just from a hardware perspective, is the number of devices equal the number of students networked to a physical switch. And I don't want to expose my router on this show or show you like what I even run, but I'll just keep that part real simple right now and tell you that is a segmented switch, meaning that it can ping the IP of the router, but it has no idea about anything else inside my house. Like, it doesn't know that there's a number of, Alexa devices or whatever the heck spread throughout here. It does not know that. It's literally served on its own line, and this is called Vlan segmentation, or virtual LAN segmentation. Literally just assigns it a whole different range of IP addresses that do not have crossover to the typical range I would use for my own home. Very straightforward. In fact, most routers have a setting where you can configure a VLAN on a physical Ethernet port. So that is, at its heart, the secure aspect of this. Okay, and I want to be really clear about that. Like, because you're going to give people unfettered access, as you'll see later on, to these devices. They can shell on them, they can curl on them, they can run Nmap on it and port scan me. They will not see anything outside of the other devices and the router itself that they're connected to. Just want to clear that. So, teaching this class, what did we do for the actual content? So this is interesting. NVidia has this thing called the Deep Learning Institute. I'll go ahead and bring up. And I started exploring their content. And the reason why I was doing this was I was semi-familiar with the fact that they had a headless version of the operating system that runs on these devices in such a way that it allows you to access these devices through a web portal. And the way that they accomplished that was doing something called USB over Ethernet, which is that what the right order? I think so. Yeah, or Ethernet over USB, where you can actually connect a USB-C cable to one of these devices, and from there access a device without needing like a monitor or that sort of thing. Now, what I also noticed here was that they had a number of courses that were focused very specifically on software and that sort of thing that could run on these devices. Now, the one that we were looking at was this Welcome to Getting Started with Deep Stream for Video Analytics on the Jetson Nano. So these students were now able to learn how to run what we call an intelligent video application pipeline, which means like consume multiple video feeds and run object detection algorithms by utilizing an interactive course offering offered at the Deep Learning Institute. And because we had set up these devices in such a way that they're remotely accessible, this meant that students could take the content from the comfort of their own home. And as you'll see here, one of the nice things about that was receive a certificate of completion from this Deep Learning Institute content that would sort of designate them as having learned something, which, as you can see, they sort of ran off with these on social media and used these to sort of bolster like, yay, I've completed this and made headway here. But the question you might be wondering, going back here, is what is really making this work? So we'll talk about that. But before I do that, I just want to say like what this lab's potential became. So we use this in a class that was taught from my home, which is in Houston, Texas, to students that, as far as I understand, were all located in the same city. So latency factors and things like that for accessing these devices were minimal, expected. Well, someone at work found out that I was running this and said, hey, we've got a bunch of Microsoft student partners that are located around the world. What'd be cool is if you held this workshop for them. Now I was just thinking, cool, you give me another reason to dust off this thing that required so much work, which you'll all understand in a moment what that means or what that entails. So I was super happy about it. Ran this workshop, and then it clicked. It clicked very quick while we were doing that. Students were tuning in from Bangladesh, Myanmar, Iran, Greece, South America, Norway,
England,
and England. And it made me realize real quick, the latency on this thing is not so bad no matter where you are in the world. Probably because they're hanging directly off the router. I'll be honest, I don't pay for the fastest internet because we can have a conversation about that. I'm not sure that everyone needs the fastest internet, but 100 megabit down is good enough. And apparently that will service a global consortium of students wanting to access your hardware. So what that taught me was, I bet this lab could be used for professional developers. And so the way that came about was started telling my friends at NVIDIA, hey, I have this lab and we know that it works with people in Houston and people from anywhere in the world. Let's go on a show and tell people about that. And then we'll invite them to take a portion, a subset, if you will, of the course that I would teach at the university and expose that to everybody. And that was to me, I don't know how y'all feel about COVID-19, but I always thought that it has put a personal challenge for all of us that, if you want to really punch the pandemic in the face, you can if you rise to the challenge. And for me, what I missed the most, what did it take? What did it take from us? What did it take from you? And you think about this, that would motivate you. My life pre-pandemic, one of the things I enjoyed so bad was going to hotels and various different destinations with my suitcase full of NVIDIA embedded devices and teaching people in person how awesome this was. So what got taken from me was this ability to teach at scale on a platform that I'm passionate for. And so this was the way to punch it in the face, was say, all right, I'll build a lab that anyone can come over to my house for, dial into my home for, and go from there. So what was the result of that? The result was, Pete, you alluded to earlier on the show, we held 3 workshops that were packed with developers who had expressed interest on this live stream that NVIDIA put out. It was overwhelming support. In fact, we had to cap it. And not only that, we had to add an additional session because the support was so high for this, which is not surprising. I'm not the only person that got affected by these live workshops. The whole world did. And so it was kind of like, okay, I can finally go to an IoT workshop where I can play with toys that I don't have access to. Not quite the same as holding them, but you get the idea. So with all that said in this background here, what does this workshop look like? Well, the first thing that I did was built a landing page for these devices. And I do apologize. I forgot to switch my devices on, and that's not going to be a very good demonstration for today. I don't always keep them on. So, Pete, you're going to need to shut my video down for 1 minute, and I will be right back.
We can do that.
Downstairs.
We can go back to the chat.
We'll take a
Actually,
break.
While you're doing that, I've got a bunch of links and stuff on the screen here. So this is, if you want some information about this, the Jetson Nano, then let me just copy the quick links for this, and then I can stick them on the screen and everything. So if you go to update, there'll be a link. There we are, the Jetson Nano link. So that'll take you to some information about this Jetson Nano that a lot of this is based on. Over here, so that's what Cliff was holding up there a second ago on his bench, was the Jetson Nano. So There it is. And I think, Cliff, that you've got the 2 gig version as well, haven't you? So
I
there's
did get the 2 gig version because I'm a cheapskate and didn't want to buy the 4 gig.
Well, it's like half the price. So, and it does everything you need it to do. So I think maybe you can only do 2 cameras rather than 4 or something like that. So that's that. But then there's getting started with it just here, which I've got another bit.ly for. So stick that one on the screen as well. There we are. So you can have a look at that too, and that's quite good. But it just gives you a good idea about sort of what it does and what you get in the box. And if you want to buy it, if you're in America, then SparkFun. And I know that there's some certain people, Pamela Cortez, for instance, that would be happy with plugs for SparkFun, being as that's where she came from before she went to Microsoft. So, and they're not that expensive. So I think this must be the 2 gig version, looking at their price there. But if you're in the UK, then there is you can get it from Pimeroni just there. So let's stick that one on there. And you can go and buy that from there. So this is the version that Cliff and I have got, the 2 gig version, only 60 quid. So I know it's more expensive than a Raspberry Pi, but this thing's more powerful than a Raspberry Pi. You get what you're given, essentially. Pretty cool, though. Good piece of kit. And then, I guess, Paul, have you turned everything on? And I've filled with fluff for long enough, I think. Perfect.
No, I thought that was excellent. Actually, your coverage there of the devices, because I almost glossed over that aspect. So what do you need to do this? Well, number one, the devices that Pete has shared with you here, however many that you want to use the service. And I actually found in my own use case that you can have multiple users on a single device. So what I did, instead of babysitting 30 devices, I was doing 3 users per device, which was nice because I'd only have to reset 10 devices at the end of the day. So, but getting back to what this looked like, so the lab itself is actually served from a web page that's that runs on my router. So I'm actually running a version of Nginx on the router that is serving. Essentially, this is one of those like easy front page templates. I meant to look up or remind myself the name before I got on the call today, but it eludes me. This is one of the more popular ones, which is really nice because if you want to do things like make lists and things like that, it was very, very simple. And in fact, I'll show you some of what that looks like. It's not super exciting, the code that this makes up this site, but I wanted to make something where people could go and I could, very easily direct them, grab their names on a form. So we sort of kick this off to a Microsoft form. From there, assign them to a team, because as I said, we would use 3 people per device. Have a survey that we could use to sort of gauge sentiment around how these things work. So here's sort of where we got our names from. Then all of the content that would facilitate the workshop, which more or less is almost a 100% cookie cut from what we taught in the class, all the way back in the University of Houston. So that wasn't my intention. I'll be completely honest with you. I just wanted to teach the class in January. I never thought that we would be teaching pro developers with this until we serendipitously proved that fact with the Microsoft student partner crowd. So the majority of the lab content does make use of content offered at the Deep Learning Institute that we talked about earlier. And what this sort of looks like if I was to access one of these devices, it's very easy. We would assign students to a team. They click here, get an Excel sheet. And from here, they click and they would get routed to one of these devices and they log in with the credentials. And this is like, for me, if I was, a student in college, it's such a cool way to do it because, again, it's no secure shell. It's not a scary terminal. They're going to get a full-blown experience as soon as it loads.
Still starting up.
Yes. There we go. They'll get a full lab environment that's actually serviced over Jupyter notebooks in this case. And of course, I refreshed after it had already loaded. I'm not sure why there's some delay there. Possibly taxing my network due to the stream, but I think y'all get the point. We'll go into device number 2 here, see if that one's going to give us a little bit more performance. Clear the workspace. Sure. There we go.
And obviously zoom in if you need to zoom in again. But...
is this Jetson Nano running on the Nano? Is this running in?
Yeah, this whole interface that you're seeing here is totally running on the Nano itself. Wow. So this is, and you'll notice too, like if you look at the URL, in fact, any of you would hit this device if you just go to team1.learniot.live. You would actually ping this device. What's interesting is this, and we'll see this later as I sort of get into the nuts and bolts, is how I'm rewriting that URL with some Nginx rules, how I'm routing it to the right device. And the other aspect is, you don't realize this, but these Jupyter notebooks, in fact, some of the other aspects here, like there is a, I'll go ahead and bring up like a launcher. You can see here, I can bring up a total terminal. You know, if you did want to teach students how to do SSH, instead of having a client, you know, maybe make it a little more accessible by just giving them a web browser. And I'm shelled into this device at this point. Trying to make that a little bigger for folks out there. So you can sort of see, like, no matter what kind of content I want to actually run with the class, it's at your fingertips. And if I need to do any sort of diagnosis, I can jump right into their device. Oh yeah, there you go. I see that Cliff is dialing in there. Pete, if you want to give him the secret password, I don't know if you remember it, but
I'll have written it down somewhere. Actually, that's me that you can see on the screen there, I think, Paul. But interestingly, you know, if you stick an HTTPS in front of it, it won't connect. You have to do it without the HTTPS, which is interesting.
Correct. And the reason why I did not set up HTTPS redirect on here, because there's no point from a standpoint. Like, all it would do is obfuscate the communication from the client to here. And like, 2 reasons why that's not useful. Let's say someone is doing something that I don't want to see. I actually would like to TCP dump that traffic raw and see what kind of nefarious thing they're doing. And second, you'll see there's some directives here where I'm very specifically looking at that traffic to come over as HTTP for the purpose of how we're forwarding the additional services like WebSockets and things like that. Right. So the benefits here, and this is the other thing. You know, we don't have to you don't have to think about it as like punching COVID in the face, but like, what are the opportunities that we learn from having to adapt to this stuff that makes our lives even easier, assuming that COVID had never happened? Well, the first one is, I no longer have to take my devices with me anywhere, and I can give this workshop from anywhere. I can see Pete on his screen is actually dialing through, acting like it's his own device. He's in the UK and I'm in Houston. That benefit right there. I mean, think about this. All you folks out there who do IoT stuff and miss the training aspect of it. I bet you don't miss figuring out the networking at today's hotel or today's, network environment for the weekend or whatever conference you happen to be at. This removes that problem 100%. And the other benefit is that I have clear access to any of these devices. So if I want to run a refresh script or a restart script or something like that, put everything back into a vanilla state, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to take 30 devices, maybe plug them in one by one and get them back going. So this is arguably one of those dream scenarios that I think any IoT proctor has definitely thought about. It doesn't mean we've all done it. And I get it. Like, it does do a minor disservice because the device isn't in the person's hands. Maybe. If you want to, I think we could accomplish that by handing a physical device out as a prop. We could still accomplish that. But what it solves is the scalability problem and the effort of setting these things up. So, like, I would love to, when COVID is over, go back on the road and know my devices are safely accessible at home, rather than bring them with me and have unknown issues along the way. Or maybe have both. Bring the devices with you. Know you always have a tether back home. So
you also
what
get
is
the advantage as well, Paul, is the fact that you can give this class to people that can't afford a device. There's students in another part of the world that you can't get to because you can't fly there because the travel budget at Microsoft isn't going to pay for it, or the university, that sort of thing. So you can give this class to someone somewhere else, and the learning can carry on, which is for me awesome.
100%. And I think that you're hitting a nail on the head there. I think what the bigger picture is you enable that ability to access the IoT devices. What our unfair advantage has always been with IoT workshops is that people want to come to them because they feel they'll get to leave with a toy or get to play with a toy. That is our unfair advantage. It is okay, imagine, I know this. I've been to too many conferences where I'm the only IoT workshop, and there's always call the fire marshal because there's so many people lined up to get in for a free device. It's what other talks have that? Download our free software. That doesn't feel like you're giving me something. Have this microcontroller. So we always had that advantage. But now, the other way of looking at this is, we can enable people for devices that they don't even have, which is a bigger deal. And again, what's enabled? This isn't cloud stuff. In fact, this is the stuff we as software developers don't like to talk about, or we take for granted, or we assume, or we figure out and forget. I don't know, describing myself here. And that is the subject of networking. So let's go ahead and take a look here. I'll show you just real quick what some of this stuff looks like. So again, this is a basic website. It was a template that I pulled off of, it's like a common front page thing. There must be comments in here that will remind me.
Can you zoom in again, Paul?
Off of GitHub.
Zoom in.
Yes.
I will be your zoom in instructor for the rest of the show.
Love it. Please. So configuring this site was really straightforward because it actually just has a config YAML file to it that basically lets me build this site in seconds. So give it a title, give it a logo. Down here, I have my icons that I'm using for everything that you saw on the page, each of the elements that you saw, or if I want to have a list, and then making it so that it displays horizontal and vertical, or literally options you set inside the configurator. And that's it. I'm not expecting this part to be teaching anybody anything new, but the cool thing was that I was able to grab this template that was so fast to just take. And I feel here, we look at the README. That'll tell us what this is. My gosh. Homer is the name of it. Let's go ahead and bring that up. So you need to build a website in a pinch, and you don't want to be spending time actually thinking about how to write HTML and JavaScript from scratch, right? This is my thought process anyways. This is the one, Bash and Words. He deserves all of the credit here. This saved me so much time. The reason why I kind of opted for this too, you might be wondering, well, how do you even get the idea to use Homer? There's a lot of self-hosted projects out there, and what people will do, say you're running services inside your network, maybe you have a Plex server or something like that, and maybe your own GitLab and things like that. It's nice to have an index that's locally accessible on your network to get to those things. And so that's what this traditionally is used for. So you'll see in the example here, a section for applications, awesome app, another one. And you can see here, you can run the thing in Docker. There's a nice demo here. It's totally supported. And at the end of the day, there's not this thing's awesome. It solves its problem really well. You'll see this looks just like the site I showed you, except I changed the colors here and there. That's it. I just wanted something really easy off the shelf that would perform my basic requirements, essentially, which I knew what they were. So even if you're, taking away something from today, like I don't want to build an NVIDIA workshop. Well, maybe you want to build, a website from which to teach from. I found Homer was super easy. You literally just go to the YAML-based configurator and configure it to your needs. Tell it what things you want, and they just appear there without the overhead of like, and I love WordPress. Don't get me wrong, but without the overhead of a full-on like CMS with a back end. Like this is lightweight, so it runs on a router. Like no issues. Totally cool. The more interesting part is how are you doing all the magical tricks of rerouting a URL that someone clicks on a web page here to a physical device that's somehow set up in that cluster. Like how did that happen? And if you look at the URL, everything is getting rewritten very clean. So the trick with that, I'll show you, we'll kind of walk through the Nginx configuration. And I do apologize. Sometimes I'm crude about how I talk about things because I don't care to be an expert in Nginx. I care to be an expert enough for it to serve what I need it to do, right? And then kind of get out. What I found, though, because of some of the intricacies of what we're doing here, basic configuration knowledge was not enough. You had to do a little bit extra. Now, you might be wondering, well, I don't use Nginx. Use something else. Doesn't matter. All web server configurations, as far as I'm concerned, are basically the same thing. You have to tell it how to take a request, what to do with that request, and give it special behaviors where needed in order to make sure that your application gets serviced appropriately. That's all that this is. It's like a gateway. If you've never used a web server platform like Nginx or Apache before, it's literally like, think about it like you make a phone call and that goes to the dispatch box that then routes it to where it needs to go. It is the operator. It is literally that. So it's going to listen on some port, traditionally in our case, port 80. It's another reason why port 443 it does not work. We'll just say that I reserve that for something else. But you set this up to listen on port 80, and any web requests that it gets, you can then programmatically or configuratively tell it what to do with them. So these are some basic options here. Tell it who to run as. So running as user nobody is pretty smart, because if someone was to exploit, say, a vulnerability in the version of Nginx that I may be running, they only get access to the nobody account. So they're not going to be able to necessarily do much damage aside from delete files that are owned by nobody in that case. Unless, I say that. Unless there's a root privilege escalation point somewhere, then I'm toast. But, okay, we want this to work. That's the main key here. A few different options here for worker processes. Again, this is running on a router. I want to keep that slim. So give it a single worker process to run from. Determine where your error logs go and that sort of thing. These are really useful, especially if you're setting these things up. You don't know where requests are going. The error log will tell you things. Now, this is what I love, is that because we're using Visual Studio Code, you don't even have to know what these freaking directives do, because you can hover over them and it'll tell you. Go VS Code for that. Okay, you don't even have to know anything. It'll tell you. And my traditional way of working with these things is you look at an example and you slap chop it until it becomes what you need. But in this case, you can actually learn by hovering over these things. Again, like it even knows, the user knows everything. The number of worker processes, etc. So here what we're doing is setting up the HTTP directives that it would be able to handle and what sort of things that we want to pass along for any requests that get handled by Nginx. So, like tell me the user agent, tell me if this has been forwarded by something else prior to coming here, those sort of things. And also, if I want to handle MIME types and that sort of thing, here's the include with which to get this. So your multimedia sorts of things, max body size, etc. Now here's where the magic happens. This is going to get a little ad nauseum, but for good reason. So the first thing you'll see is that I'm serving how I serve up Learn IoT Live. This is a good basic example for how to serve up a web page on Nginx. Tell it the port you want to listen to, and tell it the server name that it should respond to. Now, this is interesting. At some point, I have registered a domain name called Learn IoT Live, and I have pointed it at the IP address of my home network, essentially, the public-facing IP address. When you hit this URL, it gets routed. If you hit it over port 80, it will get intercepted by this Nginx process, which then tells it, here's where I want you to log any access attempts to that server name as that comes in. And by the way, one of the really interesting things here is that Nginx, as far as it's concerned, does not care where the Learn IoT Live request came from so much that whatever system has sent a request to it that it contains in the body or in the request message, I should say the header, I would like to go to Learn IoT Live. And this is the dispatch for that. So then we set up things like, hey, here's the root document, which if you were to look on the JFFS, which is the journal flash file system, where I store this configuration for this website, it tells it, look inside there, and anything that is an index HTML or index PHP, go ahead and attempt to render that to the user. If there's an error for whatever reason, throw them off to 404.html, etc. And I want you to start them in root/www. And by the way, if there's any images, JavaScript, JS, CSS, Flash Media, or static files, I want you to go ahead and include those as well. So it will allow that type of request. If it wants to see, like, pull an image, that'll come back. So that's what serves up just the website. For most people out there, if you've ever used Nginx, you didn't learn anything just now. You're just like, that's a common server directive. Well, what about cleanly rewriting those URLs to the device? So you're going to notice that these repeat. I have one for each team. Team 1, Team 2, Team 3, Team 4. I will ask you all, why do you think that I have static entries for each and every single device when obviously you could do something like this, which would be a regex match, and match any number of requests? Why would I repeat myself 10 times? Take a guess. There's a really good reason for this.
I don't know, stop some sort of brute force attack on domain names or something to see other things? I don't know.
That's a good reason, but that's not why. I mean, I don't even know that I'd say that, because you could also do something like
suggested by Chris in the chat.
Different destination ports.
Yeah.
From Chris in the chat.
That's a great guess, but it's not the answer. And by the way, to your point, Pete, I could just do a regex that accepts 0 through 10 or whatever, 1 through 10, and we'd be fine. So it's not the reason why.
Is it because regex is just so horrible that you just couldn't bring yourself to use it?
It wants to punch regex in the face.
He always looks like the cat walks across the keyboard, doesn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, you need to be Stephen Pears if you do regex.
You're really close, Cliff. You're super close, man. So the reason is, and I found this out through trial and error, is that if a request comes through to a server directive that has that enabled somehow, like let's say I enable that regex gets fired every single time a request comes in. It is not smart enough to statically generate this table. And so what ends up happening is that as more and more and more and more requests come in, which, by the way, you might not realize this, but if we go ahead and jump into one of these Jupyter notebooks and F12 tools on this thing is constantly talking back and forth to itself. So if we inspect this page, because of the WebSockets that are there, I don't know why my F12 tools they're loading. That's why. See, because it's hammering so much. That's probably why. And if you take a look the network performance, you will see here that this page, simply by visiting it and starting to interact with it, it's not like you get one request per, you get multiple requests. This is actually interesting to keep up for the next portion. You'll see this is starting a different WebSocket, et cetera, et cetera. So if I go ahead and refresh this with the tools open, and I apologize, I don't know if I can make the tools bigger. We'll do our best here. You can see the network traffic that's beginning to come off here. Let me go ahead and make that bigger.
You can use Zoom it
Like,
if
look
you've
at
got
all
Zoom it
these
installed.
fetch. Let's see if zooming helps there.
Yeah, Zoom it if you got
Yeah.
that little tool. Yep.
It looks like I can independently zoom on the right. Hopefully that's enough. It's not so much the what it's saying, it's the how much it just did on a single refresh. But it's not just that. This thing's going to periodically check in with itself. You'll see there's new requests happening every second. So if you have 10 devices, and they're all handling those requests via a regex, you're introducing a whole additional expensive layer of processing for all of those requests. And it's not like it's going to grind it to a halt, but the performance all of a sudden does degrade. So what you find, and I was reading about this online, is like nobody uses the regex match because, like, while you're allowed to use it, the second you use it in a single server entry, any request that ever comes in, whether it's for that device or another one, will attempt to see if it matches that. And so you just take a huge hit. It's the takeaway there. Now, how we rewrite that URL, the biggest trick here is using the proxy set header. So this allows redefining or appending fields to the request header passed to the proxied server. Because what this really sends you to is Jetson Nano Team 1 port 8888. And in fact, someone in the chat had mentioned, well, is it different ports on each device? Nope. They use the same image on each device. The only thing that I change on them is the host name. So one thing I did forget to say here is that you would want to set a static host name entry on your device so that anytime a device with that MAC address turns on, it gets assigned this host name. You would want to do that. Yeah. But you'll see they're literally the same entry. And so what happens here is because I've set a proxy set header, which this definition will do better than my explanation of this, can allow me to redefine when that request comes in and essentially rewrite it. So it won't necessarily see that it's headed to Jetson Nano Team 1 port 888. It will instead set the header back to the host, is what it's doing here. And it will do this for, you might be wondering, okay, Paul, this one made sense. You have a website that has images, JavaScript, CSS, and things like that. That makes sense why we would want to access those locations. What the heck is going on here with API, kernels, channels, IO pub, shell, stdin? That was some trial and error by looking at these requests, which you will notice channels, sources, terminals. The beauty of F12 tools is you would wonder, like, well, how did you catch them all, Paul? Oh, very easy. I just found all the ones that had red X's next to them because they wouldn't complete the request. So you look at those until the thing works enough. And then what we do here for these setting the header, we upgrade the connection to a WebSocket here so that it's capable of speaking to the kernel that is actually servicing you that live interaction, and what's also arguably spawning those additional check-in requests every 1 second or whatever. That's it. You set that up, and all of a sudden you're now able to rewrite those requests, repeat it 10 times, and now that's how we essentially go from an entry here to accessing a true device with the host name utilized here instead of me routing that to where it originally went.
Paul?
Now, some folks would think there's two ways you could do this, because you got to understand the concept of the host name at this point is not the same as the request. Well, in fact, you can totally see it isn't. This says Jetson Nano. Where did that come in? That is a static entry in the router, like I alluded to earlier. You could also use an IP address here. But one of the reasons that I chose to instead use a static host name was if you ever think like, oh gosh, like someone's device is in trouble. It's not rendering this page. Maybe I can lifeline to it by shelling into it. Do you want to remember an IP address, or do you want to remember a host name? It's very easy to say, which team are you? Team 2? And I get it. You could use ascending, static IPs, like starts in the .01, .02, .03 range. But this is just easier to do it that way. And so at the end of the day, what you've sort of seen up until this hour is the magic that makes all of that happen, which is essentially, servicing a website using some special configuration here. And that effectively gets us labs in the era, real device labs in the era of COVID-19. So,
have you got an extension installed in VS Code that's giving you the IntelliSense and highlighting for the Nginx Conf?
Yes. In fact, if you ever want IntelliSense for anything in Visual Studio Code, here's how you do it. Control-Shift-P, which will bring up your
command palette.
What would we call this? Command palette. And from here, just type the word format. And if it's a document it's never seen before, so in this case, it's already been set up. But if you click this and it's never seen it before, it'll say, hey, do you want a formatter for whatever this is? And it will then bring you to the extension library. So I'll just take us there for right now. And from here, you can search for formatters. In fact, the way that I told you before will only give you formatters. It will only give you them. And you'll see there's formatters for like everything: CSS, Laravel, MATLAB. You install. This is the one feature that I can say got me off of Notepad++. I love Notepad++ before this, because like it has the same thing. It has these awesome formatters. And that used to be one of those tools I'd go back and forth to, depending on what I'm working on. But ever since this feature came to VS Code, it's like, never go back. Never. And it works with like anything. Like you can put esoteric stuff in here. And the beauty is, I was saying earlier, like normally I would like very crudely talk about like, well, I don't even know what this thing does. It's set to off. You could just hover over things and it tells you what they mean. That is so powerful. You're an automatic expert. You can save those brain cells for other things to remember more important information.
Which one did you get then? Which format was it that gave you the Nginx one out of that list?
The one that I used was I think it'll tell us, there's a couple ways to tell. I used the one from Simon Schneider because I saw it had been downloaded 44 million times or something like that. It was like a ton of time. But if you don't know, you can always go to Format Document, and there's the settings that you can click on here. And I do believe this will take me to, will it tell me? Because it actually gave me two options when I first installed this. Let's see. Format. I apologize. I'm also not the best at using VS Code in general. So yeah, Format Document, forced. It's not telling me which one it's set to, but I want to say it is Simon Schneider's. Which
it looks like
you install it.
It didn't give you an install link, did it? It didn't say install next to that extension on yours, so it must be that one you've got installed.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to, yeah.
So how about the physical setup? You mentioned the fact you've got the devices plugged into the router. But was there other things you need to set up? Because they're doing like kind of training like visual learning models and stuff like this. So have you got like a bunch of cameras pointing at your house to the road outside, or you've trained the cat to walk past every 10 minutes, that sort of thing?
I have my own cameras that, yes, they could split over, that they could access, but we didn't use cameras for this particular content. If we did want to do like connecting to an RTSP stream or something like that, we could send them to a public one. Or the other trick is that the primary content that we use actually leverages local MP4 files. So, but it's literally a configuration change if you did want to use something else. But for the physical aspect here, each device is literally powered. There's 2 power strips on the left and right side here that I called an electrician and made sure the amperage draw here wasn't going to be anything crazy, and it's not. You can totally plug in. I think he was saying like 50 devices. You still wouldn't even have to care about. You turn those on, make those network to the switch, and then the switch is plugged into a VLAN designated port on the main router.
Cool. That's very cool.
And you posted a photo on Twitter, and it literally looked like the Borg cube. So I think you turned all the lights out, and it was just all green LEDs. It was, I liked that particular picture. Let's see if I can find that.
Next thing you need to do now, Paul, is get a Rockstar kind of like bandy kind of metal casing. You know what they put all the speakers and band equipment in? Hard shell case. Fit it into there, and that way you've got your case to go traveling with.
You are reading my mind. So these currently sit on a Pelican case, but I haven't bought the foam punch out because I need to get like a huge piece of it. That's what you would do. You use a block of styrofoam or something like that, punch it out, and then it's like one of those party coolers. I like that. Pete has the pickup of. That was an interesting day. That's when I found out they turned the electricity back on in Texas back in January. For anybody that was aware that our state had a power outage, was those things came back on.
It was your fault.
I was stuck.
Of course you were. That's awesome. So now the other thing that's interesting here is, like, as part of this workshop, and I don't want to, on Thursday, we don't really want to reinvent the wheel. But I did want to sort of talk about what we're going to do on Thursday with Cliff and I. I hope that goes over well. Hopefully we can get your device connected up. And, screen capture. We need to have screen capture, Cliff. I'll talk to you offline about that. But we do have this link to further learning here. Excellent. And at the end of taking these courses, what we would do, especially with the pro devs, is point them off to this project called Intelligent Video Analytics with NVIDIA, Jetson, and Microsoft Azure, which is a full-blown 8 hours of live stream that will teach you how to build a Azure provisioned IoT Edge device that you can then build your own custom object detection model for, which is funny enough what these cameras are running right now. If we see something drive into view, you might see it draw a box around it. Oh, there we go. There, you saw that?
Perfect timing. Yeah.
That's running a model built with custom vision AI. So the fun part here is I'm not going to leave you with like, here's a demo of a thing that detects objects that we trained it to. You can train it to detect whatever you want. And it's easy. I won't spoil it too much, but you can like come in here and be like, that's a car, that's a car. You have now trained the model to detect cars. Now repeat that over 100 images, spit it out, train it, and you get yourself a model that you can then deploy to the device. Teach it to detect the dog and the cat, things like that. Then what we show you is connecting that to a number of different Azure services like time series insights, which can show you over time the detections that these things have seen. So here I've got it rigged up to my 4 camera locations that you saw. And this will tell me, you know, what it saw at the pool, what it saw in the home, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go, the final thing that we show there is something called Power BI, where we create a live dashboard. And in this case, this will be taking live data from those 4 cameras that you saw as soon as this loads. Not sure what I've done to my network here today, but we are like out of bandwidth. Maybe I should pay for the expensive.
Yeah, or maybe switch your PC to high performance mode or something. You know, I don't know. There is a quick question in the chat. There's a couple of questions in the chat actually, Paul. But one of them is why a VLAN for each board? From Chris, was that so you could isolate them from your home network? Was that what that was about? Or
100%, yeah. And actually, only the switch. Well, yeah, actually, each board is VLAN, but they're automatically VLAN because they plug into that switch, which plugs into the designated VLAN port. But that's why, like, because I don't want some kid, you know, going into a terminal and being like, you know, sudo apt install nmap, blah, blah, blah. Oh, look, now I've got your Plex server. Like, just don't want that.
On that same topic earlier on, I forget who it was now, somebody asked whether or not you had to open specific ports to get some of this to work, other than, I think you mentioned 80 and I think I saw 8888 there as well. Did you have to open some specific ports as well, or?
Only port 80, because everything else gets translated internally through Nginx. So the only exposed port is port 80.
Cool. Easy.
Yeah, super easy in that regard. I don't know why this Power BI dashboard will not load. We'll get it eventually.
How long did it take you to build all this then, Paul? There's quite a lot of work going on here.
Oh, to build this? So I had some smart people on call. One was a network engineer from a data center, and another was an electrician or electrical engineer, I should say. And that made me at least confident with the plan that I had. So it was like, you know, like I called up the network engineer. I'm like, yo, I set up a VLAN. What else can I do to be more secure? He's like, you're doing the right thing. It wasn't until I got to the forwarding ports for all the WebSocket stuff. Like, I actually thought I was done earlier than I really truly was, because I you know, certain services weren't coming back for whatever reason. And so the time to answer your question directly, I thought about the idea. I had to go to Micro Center and like, I really wanted to buy like a power strip that could hold all the devices on one. Ended up buying 2 instead of one single long rail, which was probably a better idea. Had to wait for the router to arrive from Amazon, which took like a day. So from ideation to actually seeing it was probably 2 days or 3 days tops.
Wow, that's quick.
Oh, impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is real quick. That's quite impressive.
But keep in mind, like I'd already had some experience using Homer, because I do use it for service discovery for private things on my network. So I knew that already. And I knew that if I could network to one device, that I could network to all 10. So it was kind of a question at that point, like, oh, let's, you know, ask the network engineer if this is the right way to do this. As soon as he said yes, it was like, okay, cool. Hey, can you ping this URL? And the hardest thing to figure out was to set port 80 on my particular brand of router. Absolutely required modifying something in the startup script, because like it doesn't want to expose that port. Which is my router. I have shell access to it, so it's going to do what I tell it to do. So there was something I had to do there, which was basically accept traffic on port 80, which is not an option in the standard software that I run. So you can see here the this is the Power BI report.
Can we zoom on that again, Paul?
I'm sorry?
Can we zoom in on that?
Yes. In fact, I think I just accidentally
refreshed
it.
Did you say we can get to that URL, Paul?
The dashboard?
Yeah. Did you just say ping that URL?
Not
in there?
RBI, isn't it?
yeah. Unfortunately, no. This would require.
Oh yeah, don't do that.
It's not shared. But let me try to load that again while we're chatting here. Still got 15 minutes. Surely it will load by then. I don't know what that is. Is this a service degradation? I wonder. Unknown.
Azure's not down again, is it?
Yeah. Well, wouldn't surprise
Not
me.
again. Or Power BI having a service degradation, because this is slow. Slow. Yeah, we'll open up the dashboard. Dashboard's a little more interesting because it looks at things in real time. So I wanted to hopefully show that off. I mean, could also talk about it in picture form because I have a picture here. Well, that's not quite as exciting. It's not the one I wanted to show you. We'll wait for that to load. So what's interesting here, though, is you get to take. What we'll do is we're not going to reinvent the wheel and like reteach the class. We don't want to do that. But on Thursday, what Cliff and I will go through is essentially starting off this extended content that you see here. So we're going to go through, hopefully on Thursday, we'll essentially look at the content of Module 1 here, which is an introduction to DeepStream, which is a intelligent video application pipeline framework that lets you very easily build apps that run on these embedded devices, consume multiple video feeds, and apply custom object detection models to possibly visualize results in services like Power BI, if it ever loads today, something like that. And then you can do cool things, right? Like, where's the last place the cat was seen? You know, I can click here and, well, if this was being responsive, I would click there and it would change the view, as you might imagine. Not sure what's going on here.
You were trying to demo it. You didn't do necessary praying beforehand, you say. That's what it was.
My words, man, on the home network. I guess you do need more than the 100 meg down when you're on a live stream all the way to the UK.
It's probably the app that you're struggling with.
Maybe.
Yeah. It's always that. And so anyway, what I would like to push out too, just because it's coming up, we have our July OT is going to be starting soon. I know we're talking about that in May. We have a whole nother month to go through. But last year, this was actually the project that I focused quite heavily on in terms of what we had created for July OT. But what this is it's a month long of IoT projects that we build at Microsoft and in the community that we sort of share with others. And I don't know how much I can reveal here, but Cliff and Pete have devices that will probably make it into some sort of content that's featured. Yeah, there we go.
Who knows what's in that box?
But we'll be talking about a different device that does similar types of workloads. So it'll be really interesting because we know that in July, we'll be talking about the Azure Percept Dev Kit. But what we'll be talking about in the next two sessions is the NVIDIA embedded piece. And what's going to be really interesting is how that hands-on experience translates to the simplified dev kit experience that we'll all hopefully be warmed up with in the next month or so. But also just want to extend that out to anybody that's tuned in right now is like, if you have a project or an idea for July OT, you know, I'm at PJ DeCarlo on Twitter, DM me or whatever, and we'll see what we could do. We'd love to roll it in, maybe even make it something that we feature. Or, you know, if it's just something you have ongoing during that month, you know, call some attention to it and that sort of thing. So we're obviously really early with this, but I do want to make that clear to folks that July OT is around the corner and is going to be, again, utilizing some things that look at content like what you've seen here, although in a more, let's just say using new devices and new services. We'll just say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about quite a bit here. I mean, this episode's been like all over the place. We got 10 minutes. I want to make sure that we do answer everyone's questions before we get to the end of the program here.
Yeah, I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat already, which has been good. It's nice to see everybody in there, by the way. We see quite a few regulars and a couple of new people as well. So welcome to you. Obviously, you've just mentioned on Thursday we'll be running the first of a series of workshops with the Jetson Nano and Deep Stream and ML at the Edge and that sort of stuff. So that's 2 p.m. BST, British Summer Time. At the same place on the Azure-ish Twitch channel, so do tune into that. It'd be really interesting to watch Cliff, see how he gets on. Certainly see how he gets on trying to do this in a hotel room in Seattle using his phone's hotspot. That's going to be that on its own. If he gets that part working, we'd probably just end the stream there because that'll be an achievement on its own. So yeah, I don't know whether or not I've got one here. I've got the same device that Cliff's got here, but I don't know whether I'll join in. I'll probably just sort of keep pushing the right buttons at the right time. And answering questions in there. Does it have a fan is a good point, actually. And I just mentioned that to Cliff before we came on stream, in that I remember when I was reading through Paul's instructions that they recommend that you have a fan. Is that something you think Cliff needs to go and order and take with him? Or is a little USB fan going to be okay? Or what, Paul?
I mean, anything as long as you're cooling it through something should be fine.
I'll find something then.
Okay.
There's a fridge in the room. I'll just stick it in there.
Yeah. Turn the AC up. Be okay.
I mean, especially once you're running like heavy deep stream workloads, which the one we're going to drop on there kind of uses everything. There's a lot of applications that'll be running side by side. It's not a bad idea. I mean, yeah, if you have a desk fan pointed at it, something that can just direct heat from that heat sink, that'll solve it. A desk fan will totally work in a pinch.
I got some little USB fans that I use my 3D printers when it's super hot. I'll grab one of those and take that with me.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, I guess it remains in the air. You'll either come to see us work with DeepStream or watch us troubleshoot hotel Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the two.
Well, we got a backup because I get 4G in the US, so the backup is dropping to 4G. But I'm not sure how that's going to work with streaming as well as playing with the NVidia and everything else at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Gotcha.
Could be fun.
Yep. So Paul, you're joining us for like 2 of those episodes. So we'll be doing it Thursday coming, and then the following Thursday as well. So I think what is it on Thursday coming? So that's the 13th, and then the 20th. We'll be doing that as well. Actually, on next Thursday evening is Knox IoT as well, and we've got Andrei Podnosov coming along to talk about Azure Digital Twins. More cool. Microsoft tech. So Andrei's fantastic. So it'd be interesting. Andrei was one of the people involved in creating the exam with myself, the AZ220 exam. So that'll be an interesting talk to watch. That will. So full day of IoT. And by the way, if you didn't see, I mentioned that. Samuel Adranyi, I think his name is, his last name. He also runs a Twitch stream like this, an IoT Twitch stream that will happen in about an hour and a half's time. So that's worth checking out. And he's also got a little workshop that he's done for Microsoft, which looks quite cool on Power Platform and IoT. So that's worth checking out as well. So yeah, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to seeing, because this is going to be a different angle to what you and I did in the class setting, isn't it, Paul, on Thursday?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. We'll go into a lot of details on like what is Deep Stream, how to manipulate it, bend it to your will, and hopefully in no time we'll have something up. That reminds me, Cliff, do you have a USB cam on hand?
Yes, I've got one of those.
Excellent. That'll make this fun. Yeah. So we should be able to hopefully build something while we're there. Shouldn't be too
exactly.
I've got it set up. I've burnt the ISO onto the SD card, and I've got it configured and set up so that it can route by my mobile phone's Wi-Fi sharing. So I'm going to use my mobile phone as the router, which is going to be fun. because I don't trust the hotel Wi-Fi to set up correctly because it quite often. Yeah. So we'll see if it all works. If not, then we'll drop to 4G and hopefully go with that. Yeah.
That'll be
As long as we don't need any funky ports other than like port 80, we should be good.
Chris is asking there in the chat how the Nano compares to a traditional graphics card for processing ML stuff.
It's going to be size, so it can perform similar types of operations and works in the same way. It is smaller though, so it has 128 CUDA capable cores, whereas what you would see on like a desktop version would be like in the thousands. So it can still run these accelerated inference workloads, but it's not going to be like the latest GTX that's come out. It's going to be, but still, nonetheless, I mean, it's very impressive. Like, you will be able to run object detection algorithms on a device that is, no smaller than, in some ways, smaller than a cell phone. Super small.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, excellent.
Cool.
I like it. Cool. Yeah. So, did you have any parting points? Oh, go on, Cliff. No, help yourself.
I was just going to ask Paul if that link that you shared earlier, Pete, the GitHub link, if people follow through with that and get to the end, do they get to be certified as well, just like the students on your course?
I wish. I need to find a way to give people something for doing it. Like Johnny Chips went through it. Johnny out in the UK, which was just fantastic. Did it in 2 days, or I think even less. I think he did it in a single day. I can't say that, but I'll say this. Like, if you did want to say go pursue the AZ220 developer cert after going through that, it wouldn't give you 100% of what you need to know. It'd give you close to 40 or 50% of it with hands-on application for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would certainly say it is a gateway, but not only that, anybody who's out there working with consulting firms and stuff like that, I was at some point, and still do today, getting regular, like maybe every other week, hey, we're going to do a POC with XYZ built off of what we learned in this content. So that's interesting.
Awesomeness. I like it.
Cool.
Excellent. So, yeah, I mean, did you have any parting comments, Paul? Any extra links you want to share, or
JulyOT.com. Like, seriously, just start thinking about it. Look at what we did last year. We don't want to necessarily be the only ones contributing there this time around. We want to certainly make this a community thing. So if that means just look at what we did and you're inspired to try something in July, or you want to build something and promote it alongside us in July, we'd love to do that. So that's kind of the big call to action right now. You might be wondering, why are we putting it out a month early? Well, we know people take off vacation in June and stuff like that. And people also like to hack in June. So if you have a hacking idea, now's the time to do it, and think about slotting it into July with us. We'd love to have you there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the plan here, at least on this show, is that we do something live on the Thursday section. Not quite sure what we're going to do yet, as we say, but something will happen in there, maybe with that box that Cliff was holding up a second ago, to have a play with something that we've been given. So I'm actually a bit annoyed that I've got to wait till July to do that live, but at least you'll have some time to play before then and now.
That'll be fun. It'll be super fun.
It will. Cool. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and watching tonight. It's been great to see you. Obviously, I'd like to thank Paul DeCarlo for coming along and taking his time to tell us that story. It's really interesting to see how you're solving that real world problem there that, obviously the pandemic has thrown us into, apart from anything, where we can't meet in person. So it will be interesting to see how we get some form of a hybrid between those two things when we go back to in person. I think there's going to be a year or so or more maybe where we're going to have an in-person and online feel to events. I expect that to happen, certainly from a Microsoft perspective. Things like Build, big events, Ignite and stuff, I think they'll probably go back to in person, but it'll be a strange combo, strange hybrid combo. So yeah, that'll be interesting. And don't forget to come back on Thursday at 2 p.m. BST, and we'll see Cliff's adventures in Seattle.
Yes.
It might just be Cliff walking around giving us a guided tour of Seattle if we can't get his Jetson working. But that'll be okay. You can show us where all of
It's fine.
Grey's
We'll
Anatomy's
use
filmed.
one of my devices. He can shell into one of mine. We got you. We got the lifeline. Yeah.
It's like he's already solved that problem. I like it. Cool. Yes. Yeah. Excellent. So yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll see you all soon. See you later.
Yeah. See you on Thursday.
Ta-da.